today I'm going to talk about how I go about making the fondant figures that I put on top of my children's birthday cakes. I thought the easiest thing to do would be to actually show you how I go about it, so I'm going to demonstrate by making a little fondant version of this Peppa Pig. The first thing that I do whenever I'm making a fondant character is go upstairs and raid my children's toy box and see if they have a plastic version. That way I can pop it down next to where I'm working and use it as a reference for everything that I'm doing, make sure I'm getting the shapes right, the colours right and everything in proportion. If you haven't got one, then make sure that you have a picture printed out or up on a screen so you can use that as a reference instead. I always start by making the bit that I think most clearly defines the character, and then I can base everything else around that. So with Peppa Pig, it's her head. And if you look at Peppa Pig, it's the shape of her head, I think, is the most distinguishing feature. It's round and then it comes out flat on the top and then comes to about halfway down and then goes in. So I want to try and replicate that as clearly as possible. However, before I do that, I need some pink fondant. I have only got white. I personally prefer to buy white and then colour my own because it saves buying packets and packets and packets of lots and lots of different fondants and then having to try and only use a tiny bit of them or mix them together in order to get exactly the shade you want. So I'm just going to knead this a little bit, make sure it's soft, and then I'm going to add some pink colouring. I use the gel colours, which you find in these little pots, because you get a greater intensity of colour without kind of ruining the integrity of the fondant and making it too soft and too sticky. So that's nice and even now, so I want to try and get a lump that's about the right size for Peppa's head. Put the rest over to one side to use again later. Now I'm going to roll it into a ball, and then I want to try and squeeze out the nose. So I'm going to try and keep a nice round head and then just have this nose coming out so it's flat at the top and coming down to about halfway down her head, like that. See, I'm going to try and get it flat, so if I put it down like that, that will help get that shape right. That's about right, but it's far too long. And one of the important things here, as I've said, is trying to keep everything in the right proportion. That's what will make it look as accurate as possible. So have a little look, her nose is much shorter than that, so I'm going to just slice that off with a sharp knife. But that will leave these edges looking very sharp, so just sort of soften them round like that. There we have it, there's her basic head shape. Now Peppa Pig has got two little ears, so I'm just going to get a little bit of fondant and make these little ears. Now what I'm going to do to make them stay on her head is I'm going to make a little, rather than trying to just stick them on the top, I'm going to make a little slit to slot them down into and just stick them into the top of her head. And I am going to make the slit using this little tool. This is a special cake decorating tool that I bought online, but it's really cheap. I'd really recommend getting one, and you get a whole set of different shapes depending on what you're trying to do. I only actually really use a few of them, but they're really worth having if you want to make a few cakes. You can use a knife or a skewer or a cocktail stick if you don't have them. So again, I'm going to refer back to the plastic one. So her ears sit towards the back of her head but level with the outside of her nose. So I'm going to try and make a little slit in the top of her head in that kind of position to slot the ears into. Now, to make sure that they stick and don't fall out, I am going to just use a little paintbrush. This is a little food paintbrush again that I bought online, and I'm going to just put a little bit of water in there. Now you can buy specialist cake glue for these kind of things, but I honestly find that water works just fine for everything that I'm trying to do. So put a little bit of water in there and then just carefully slot those ears into the hole. Squidge them about a bit to get them sitting comfortably. So for Peppa Pig's eyes, on the plastic character you'll notice that it has a slight pink rim around the outside. Now that's a detail that I've actually decided to leave off because I think it's one of those details where you don't want to put a round bit of fondant because it'll make her eyes stick out like bug eyes. And it's very, very difficult to get that kind of very, very subtle ring. So rather than having something that obviously looks not quite right, in my opinion it's best to leave that kind of detail off. I suspect nobody would look at this fondant figure and go, oh, but she hasn't got a pink ring around her eye. So I am going to just go straight in with the white eyes and then the little black dots in the centre. So I just need a tiny, tiny bit of white fondant, which I'm going to make into little circles. Then once again I'm going to refer back to the model to see where her eyes sit, and they sit just outside of her ears. So I'm going to get this tiny little ball tool and just make a little round indent for her eyes to sit into. A little bit of water again to help them stick. Then I'm going to pop, oops, the eyes into the holes. Now to make her little pupils in the middle of the eyes, I'm going to use a little black food colouring pen. If you don't have one of these, you could use just some black food colouring with cocktail stick dipped into black food colouring, and just use that to very carefully dot a little bit of colouring in the centre instead. Now, while I'm at it with the black pen, I'm also going to add the 2 dots that she has on the end of her nose. Now, the next feature of Peppa Pig that I'm going to add in is her cheeks. All the Peppa Pig characters have these kind of sort of slightly purpley round cheeks. So I actually want to use the same shade of pink as I used for her main body, but I'm just going to colour it a little bit darker. And the shade I happen to be using for this is called Pink Wine. So, I'm just going to get a little bit of this darker pink colour and again make it into 2 balls to try and reflect the pink cheeks on Peppa Pig's face. So, on our Peppa Pig, plastic Peppa Pig, the cheeks sit straight below the ears, so I'm going to put them in the same spot. Now to make sure that I don't have a cheek sticking out over and out of the face, I'm just going to get my round tool, wherever I've left it, that's here. And I'm just going to make a little indent into the side of her face that these cheeks will sit into. And once again, just wet it a tiny bit, tiny bit of water, just enough to hold it in place. And I'm just going to pop that cheek in there. Side. Now you'll find that you need to be very, very careful when you're handling this because obviously it's very, very soft, it's very easy to squish out of shape. And as you're going, if you find that it squishes a little bit into a funny shape, then just pop it, see if you can kind of manoeuvre it back to how it should be. But just pay attention to the fact that might happen, otherwise you'll end up with a very strange shaped pepper. So there we go, Peppa Pig has cheeks. Now the last feature of Peppa Pig's face is her smile, and she has a big red smile, so I'm going to use a red food colouring pen for that. Once again, if you've not got a red food colouring pen, a cocktail stick dipped in red colouring would work just fine. And I'm going to give her, hang on, just make sure the shape of the bottom of her face looks good. I'm going to give her a big red smile. Now Peppa Pig pretty much always wears a red dress, so I'm going to get some red food colouring and colour her a red dress. Oops, probably a bit too much. So the shape of it, whoops, looks to be kind of round but then cut off straight like a dress. So in order to achieve that shape, I'm putting it flat onto my surface. I'm just going to put a little bit of icing sugar down to stop it sticking. And I'm just going to shape it round with my hand so it ends up kind of rounded but flat on the bottom. And then I'm going to use my round ball to make a little indent in the top that her head will then come and sit on. Like that, and once again, tiny bit of water just to sit in that and hold those two sides together. So when you look at her figure, her face is kind of up a little bit. So I'm just going to pop her head on a similar kind of angle on her body, like that. I'm going to pop her over there. And the next thing I'm going to do is make her some little arms. Now, on the plastic one, the arms stick out. If you attempt to stick arms like that with just pure fondant, without anything in it to stiffen it up, or without using modelling paste, or without using wires, they will go like this. And it'll look a bit rubbish. So rather than risk that happening, I'm going to place her arms around her body instead so that they will stay in place. So I'm just going to get a little bit of pink. And I'm going to roll it with a slight blob on the end. I'm just going to roll one bit. And that's going to be her hand. Now, it would seem that Peppa Pig has 3 fingers. So I'm going to cut her 3 little fingers with my knife. Now you want these arms to look kind of even, so once you've got them both, pop them next to each other, go, oh, those fingers look a bit longer, so I'll just trim them off. And these arms are both a bit long, so I'm just going to trim them both off so they look kind of symmetrical. Now, looking at here, the arms are down pretty much below where we put those pink cheeks in earlier. So I'm going to get my sharp tool again, and I'm just going to poke a little hole in the side for the arm to sit in. It's much easier if you put these things into a hole, because that will hold them into place. If you just stick them on the outside, then they're much more likely to fall off. So again, tiny bit of water into the hole, grab an arm, very carefully because they're quite delicate, slot it into the hole, and then I'm just going to curve it around her body, like that. And I'm going to do exactly the same on the other side. A little bit of water. The arm in, and then curve it round so she's got it out in front of her. Now the last thing that my Peppa Pig needs is some legs. If I attempt to add legs like these ones, there's no chance that they will hold, they just collapse. Now again, you could do it with wires where you put fondant around the outside of the wires. Personally, I find that quite tricky to do, and I find it quite difficult to get it to look how I want it to. So instead, I'm going to make Peppa Pig some welly boots, because they can be nice and chunky, nice and sturdy to hold her body up. And she loves jumping in muddy puddles, so she'd be perfectly happy with welly boots. Now I believe, although correct me if I'm wrong, that she wears yellow boots, so I'm just going to colour a little bit of yellow fondant. I'm just going to get 2 little sort of blobs, I think. Now welly boots normally are the kind of L shape, but having that L, the up bit of the L is going to be quite weak, and that may well collapse down. So for the effect, I think you're absolutely fine almost just having 2 little yellow blobs sitting underneath the feet sticking out, sitting underneath the dress sticking out ever so slightly. So just going to get those, make sure they're the same sort of size. I'm going to get my pepper, pop a little water underneath to stick these onto, and then I'm just going to literally pop them on, make sure they are secure, like that. They can be her welly boots. Now what you need to do now is kind of get your pepper stable. Now because of the design of what we've done, she does stand up quite nicely, but sometimes you'll find they might fall forward or might fall backwards, so just try and arrange it, try and just jiggle it around a little bit so it seems as though they're going to stand up nice and straight. Then if you're at all worried about them, just lean them up against something very soft, or maybe a kind of balled up bit of tissue, or even another bit of fondant, something like that, until they've set hard a little bit and holding their shape, so that they don't accidentally topple over and like squash her nose sideways or something like that. So here we have it. Here is my finished Peppa Pig. Now if you've got any questions about making the Peppa Pig or any other characters, because I'm hoping that this tutorial will be kind of general enough that you could apply some of these things to other characters, then please make sure that you let me know.